Hello and welcome to the Best Available Draft Podcast. That's right, it is not the NFL Draft Podcast you were looking for, but it is the best one available right now. My name is Matt Minich. I am your host. Joining me today is Benjamin Solak from the Draft Network and the Bleeding Green Podcast. And we're going to talk a little bit about the work he's done on a piece called Contextualized Quarterbacking. Ben, how you doing today?
Oh, I'm always well, Matt. Thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah, appreciate you being here. So now, first of all, I saw a somewhat predictable response to a post of your work earlier this week. So just to start off with a disclaimer, should contextualized quarterbacking, should this piece be used as the end-all, be-all, avoiding all film work and anything else on a quarterback, and just 100% make a selection based on your work?
I mean, no, and it never is, right? I mean, everything that we have to do evaluations is a tool, and you want to use them as a tool. You want to put them in context. The CQ has only existed for 2 years, so I can't even tell you how sticky the thing is yet. You know what I mean? I'm going to keep doing it, but I'm not even positive it has, retentive value in terms of the measurements yet. You know what I mean? It's only 2 years young, and so we've got to use everything in context. Like, not even a scouting report is final when it comes to a draft room. You need 5 scouting reports, 10 scouting reports. You need the different guys got different eyes on different people. And so, all things have their piece of the pie, but it's not a whole picture of the quarterback. It's only a part of it.
Yeah, 100% with you. I think it's like when you're watching the combine and somebody does something crazy, it doesn't mean, oh, we got to draft that guy. It means, all right, maybe I need to take a closer look at his film. Drew Tranquil is an example for me. I'm much more interested in the drills at the combine and seeing how they moved than just the time. And I remember watching him move in linebacker drills. I was like, okay, this guy's a lot smoother than I thought he was on film. I got to go back and take a closer look, watch a couple more games and see what's up. So, to me, that's the same way to look at this. And also, I think it helps you to put some numbers on some things that maybe you did see on film. I know that was something with the 2018 edition was it kind of confirmed a lot of things for me that I thought I saw on film on Baker Mayfield, but that I did not have a way of really, locking down and putting into numbers. So, to get into a little bit of that, I think a big thing, and I'm kind of I'm an old school guy, and I took a lot of where I look at quarterbacks from Bill Walsh's books, and one of the big things he always talked about was the ability to create. And we talk about athletic quarterbacks now. He didn't want his quarterbacks running necessarily, but he wanted guys that can move and could do things on the run. So I really think when you talk about the different throwing platforms, I think that's a very valuable tool to look at to see what those guys can do when things aren't perfect. Can you talk a little bit about the different throwing platforms, how you look at that and evaluate that on film?
Yeah, so there's 3 throwing platforms that are of interest. Basically, we have a clean platform, which is just we're in the pocket. Nobody's obstructing our ability to step our lead foot into our throw. Nobody is obstructing the area in which we're going to follow through for our throw. Clean platform also encapsulates those throws in which, like quick little, looky screens, right? And maybe middle screens and tunnel screens where, the quarterback's not, planted in the ground. He's not like the classic traditional throwing motion, but he knew he was going to be kind of doing a little hot throw, doing a little pass, something like that. And so it's still the expected platform, right? We don't really want those certain plays to leak into the other platforms and kind of confound that data a little bit. There's the move platform, which is basically the quarterback's on the run. It's when you're throwing on the move, you're launching off of one foot, your momentum's going one direction. It's a difficult platform to throw from. You need to have that talent, understand how to generate velocity. And then kind of in the middle is the adjusted platform. And the adjusted platform very much so is, all right, we wish we could be throwing on a clean platform here, but there's pressure up the middle. And so we've got to step into the bucket, or we've got to shorten our throwing motion and cut short our follow-through because there's a body there, right? Or we're on the move, but we're about to get hit, so we've got to kind of sidearm it. We've got to, stop our feet anything that kind of falls in between clean and move ends up being adjusted. And that just shows the quarterback's spatial awareness, his vestibular sense, and his ability to change his arm slot, his ability to generate velocity without his hips, right, without being able to fire through the lower half. Those are the three platforms we talk about. And you're right, it's important to see that a quarterback can still throw the football from those platforms. And we also want to see how much his accuracy and his ball placement change from the clean platform to the adjusted platform. Really, how much does interior pressure, again, a guy in this quarterback's face, how much does it affect him? If it affects him a lot, well, we should know that before we draft him. That way, we want to get him outside of the pocket. If we know he's really good on the move, Drew Lock's accuracy improves when he's on the move. It's a better score. Same thing goes for, I think, Will Grier. Get these guys out of the pocket. They're good passers on the move, even better than they typically are, in a clean platform. And so it helps us figure out how to design an offense for our quarterbacks.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it definitely seems to be the trend, the way the NFL is going. And there are definitely a handful of guys right now that are very much like that, from your Aaron Rodgers, even at that level, and Russell Wilson, the guy too, that you definitely see defenses that don't necessarily care about sacking those guys. They just don't want them running around and looking downfield. So absolutely great way to look at that. So who stood out to you in this class as guys who were particularly, well, you kind of touched on it a little bit with Locke and Grier. Would those be kind of the main guys that would stand out to you as guys who did better on the move and when they had to adjust?
Yeah, Drew Lock was the main one who surprised me in terms of Lock's really good on the move, and he's pretty solid in the adjusted as well, relatively. Now, it's worth noting, Lock scored well in accuracy and in placement generally, and so he had, as big of a drop-off to the adjusted platform as anybody else, but his numbers are still kind of better than the class. Obviously, I think you talk about a guy like Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray's completion percentage went up about 10% when he was on the move as opposed to when he was in the pocket. Accuracy went up 5%. Placement went down a little bit, but really it's negligible. And so you're looking at, obviously, a passer like Kyler Murray who's going to be very effective on the move. And then I brought up Will Grier as well. Will Grier was a player who impressed when he was basically in a lot of different contexts. Grier was a good a passer against pressure. Grier was a good passer beyond his first read, which also kind of encapsulates some of those throws where you're on the move, where you're scrambling. But if we talk about off-platform specifically, change in accuracy and change in placement, again, relatively negligible when he was on the move. And then decent, but not too terrible drop-offs on the adjusted platform. You'll never find a quarterback who's better on the adjusted platform, but if there's small drop-offs, then we can feel good about his ability to create. And you see that in Grier's tape as well. The player who really struggled in that regard was Dwayne Haskins, and it was disappointing to see because Haskins is viewed as one of the top quarterbacks in the class. But we're talking about precipitous drop-offs in ball placement, 50% on adjusted platform, 40% on the move platform. So this player needs to be in the pocket in a clean platform to be successful as a thrower at this juncture in his career. Now, obviously, Ohio State didn't move him out that much, so maybe there's more room there to work on. You have to, work out the guy, put him through drills to feel that out. But we're talking about placement scores below 400 out of 1,000. Placement scores below 400 for both move and adjusted platform for Haskins. That's a problem. If you move this quarterback off his spot, his accuracy drops. And that's something that NFL teams are going to know, and they're going to try to attack Haskins in that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. You definitely see, like I said, certain game plans from defensive coordinators when you're going against a Rodgers or Wilson. You see a very different game plan when you're going against a Tom Brady, who you know isn't going to do much. I know you've only been running these numbers for a couple of years, and you're probably not getting into the NFL guys with it. I would imagine he can adjust well in the pocket, but not doing anything on the move.
Yeah, sure. And if you want to look at the quarterbacks who were best in last year's class, the quarterbacks who were best outside of the pocket as throwers in last year's class were Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, and Josh Allen. And those are probably our three best rookie quarterback performances last year. And so it's really interesting to see just early returns on those specific numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. Was there anybody who stood out when you look at what they're doing under pressure as being that they were really good under pressure, although they weren't as good on the move? in that kind of, like I said, maybe Tom Brady sort of mold of a guy who's not going to run but can make some adjustments within the pocket.
Yeah, so, I mean, the reality, very sadly, is that everybody's bad under pressure, right? Like, there's nobody who's particularly strong. I would say the best quarterbacks that you'll see for contextualized quarterbacking under pressure are typically the quick release guys. The quick release guys who are willing to get rid of the ball to their checkdowns immediately are the guys who are often the strongest. And so we have good numbers from Ryan Finley out of NC State against pressure. We have accuracy scores around 850, placement scores around 500. Brett Rippon is very much the same, the kid out of Boise State. Accuracy of 730, and then placement above 500 again. Haskins was a guy who, when he's in the pocket and he's standing and delivering against pressure, then he's actually relatively strong. We have, 730, and then again right around 500. The other interesting thing that you see in terms of what the contextualized quarterbacking tells us about pressure is the pressure wheels. And I really like the pressure wheels. They're a new addition to this year's CQ. They weren't on last year's. And they chart the response to pressure as well as the genesis of pressure. So we have quarterbacks can respond to pressure by choosing to stand in the pocket and deliver, or stand, take a hit, and make the throw. They can escape, they can avoid the pressure and then deliver the football. They can scramble, tuck and run, they can take a sack, or they can have like a throwaway, a batted pass, right? So there's a lot of different responses. And the pressure wheels tell you how frequently each quarterback did each response when they were under pressure. And it also tells you the different types of pressure they experience in terms of which quarterbacks, were experiencing pressure because their offensive line was failing. Which quarterbacks were experiencing pressure because they themselves were inviting the pressure. They weren't noticing the blitzers, or they were managing the pocket poorly and creating rush lanes that they shouldn't have been making. And who was experiencing pressure just because they were out of the pocket, because they were scrambling, and then linebackers and corners were coming up to put pressure on them. And I think those are really interesting numbers because, again, we talk about a guy like a Will Grier. Will Grier had a very even distribution of responses. He had a decent amount of sacks, but he had a decent amount of stand delivers, decent amount of scrambles, decent amount of escapes, decent amount of throwaways. And that's what you want to see, a variegated response to pressure. He can do a lot of different things, right? And I think that that's a stronger profile for success than perhaps somebody like a Drew Lock or a Dwayne Haskins, two players who stood and delivered the football when encountering pressure over 75% of the time. And so we're talking about they're on their read, they feel pressure, and what's their response? Immediately get rid of the football, chuck it to that read. That's where you start to look at the interceptable numbers. How frequently were these players throwing interceptable passes against pressure? Because they're very often just force-feeding it to whatever read they were on and putting the ball in dangerous spots. So that's a lot of what pressure can give you when you look at the contextualized quarterbacking portfolio.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think, especially with an athletic guy like Kyler, like Lamar last year, I think the lazy scouting, the guy that doesn't really watch the film and just likes to talk about stuff will always say, oh, he's just running out of the pocket right away. And again, I think that's some of the real usefulness of this is that you can actually see those numbers and see, well, no, that guy would stand and deliver. That guy's going to take the hit. So yeah, that's definitely gives you real context on what's where those rushing yards are coming from, or where those scrambles are coming from, and all that. So now another awesome distinction that you make in this is accuracy versus placement. And as a long-suffering Bengals fan, that's something I have to live with all the time, watching Andy Dalton. Who can complete a lot of balls and throws them, in the vicinity of the receiver, but isn't necessarily setting up the yak yards. So can you get a little bit into accuracy versus placement?
Yeah, I mean, super important. I think accuracy is a catchable football. If you put the ball in a catchable spot, you're getting a good accuracy score. Period. Right? That's full on an accurate pass, because the number one job for a quarterback is to get the ball where his receiver can catch it. That's the only thing I'm interested in to start. But then ball placement takes into effect several things, but the three main things that are important are going to be, number one, like you said, maximizing yak. We want to hit players in stride. We want to keep them upright. We don't want to make them elevate so that they can catch the football with their feet on the ground, immediately turn and run. Secondly, we want to protect the ball from being played on by defensive backs. So we're always trying to put the ball into areas, like you think about fit routes against zone. Well, that receiver can't see the defensive back. So you've got to lead him somewhere where that defensive back won't be, to make it so that his body will be between the defensive back and the football. And then thirdly and finally, we have protecting wide receivers from unnecessary hits, which is very much so in the same mold as the interceptable passes, making sure you keep it away from defensive backs playing on it, where you just want to always lead your receivers away from contact. If there are oncoming hits, you want to throw to their back shoulder to turn them away from that contact, protect your wide receivers. When you look at a player like Ryan Finley, it's the perfect example. Accuracy score, one of the best in the class, .923. The dude's throwing catchable footballs 92% of the time. Then all of a sudden you go and you look at his placement score, below 600, .587. So we're talking about perfectly placed balls 58% of the time. That's not a perfect one-to-one, way that the passes are actually charted, but about 58.7%, we want to call it that. Huge delta between the two. Huge. The biggest in the class. Finley, with poor arm strength as a quarterback, can get the ball to receivers. He can throw catchable footballs, but they so often die on him to the outside or deep that defensive backs can now make plays on them. Receivers have to come back to the football, which minimizes their yak ability, so you're not getting them to depth. So Finley, a perfect example of why we need to pay attention both to accuracy and to ball placement, because it's good to throw catchable balls. That puts you a high floor prospect, but the truly elite quarterbacks will throw really well-placed balls as well. And last year, that's what separated Baker Mayfield from the class. Baker was throwing about as many catchable balls as Josh Rosen, about as many catchable balls as Lamar Jackson, about as many catchable balls as Kyle Lauletta, but nobody held a candle to Baker in terms of ball placement.
So that brings us to an interesting point. So, last year, about this time was when we started to hear the whispers that maybe Baker was going to be number one. But, I think for months, draft Twitter was on him. Well, at least weeks, draft Twitter was all over him as a high-end guy. Now the next Oklahoma quarterback is up, and even though it doesn't necessarily make a ton of sense, he is being projected highly as the number one guy in the class. How, in terms of what you're looking at in the numbers, how does Kyler compare to Baker?
Yeah, so simply, you could call Kyler a B-list Baker if you wanted to. There's a lot of similarities in terms of how their data came to pass. Like last year, Baker had really strong numbers beyond his first read in terms of his attempt share, with over 20% of his passes going beyond his first read, and again, over 20% of his passes being into tight windows. Kyler's not so large, but it's still very strong numbers competitively. 14% into tight windows, 17% beyond his first read. Those are better numbers than like a Daniel Jones or a Drew Lock in terms of how much he's doing these difficult things. People think the Oklahoma system prevents you from going beyond your first read, prevents you from going into tight windows, and sometimes it does. But because Baker and Kyler both scramble and extend plays, they frequently move beyond their first read, and they frequently throw into tight windows up against the sideline. And while that might not be traditional moving beyond a first read or a traditional tight window, it still requires the same processing after you've moved beyond the structure of the play and the same accurate ball placement to hit a tight window throw in that very narrow alley. And so those are still translatable traits. Again, Kyler's B-list. He's not doing it as frequently, and he doesn't have as good a ball placement and as good of accuracy. But that being said, competitive numbers, you should expect him to be able to translate into more pro-style systems. Obviously, if he's at Arizona, then it's a different conversation. But you could expect him to translate into pro-style systems because he's shown the ability to make those tight window throws and to move beyond his first read. Now, Kyler needs work on his footwork if he's going to go through true full-field progression. There's no doubt about that, right? We're talking about tight windows by lacing seam routes, in between sinking linebackers and waiting safeties, something he hasn't done. So you expect translation, but there's obviously a learning curve as you move into a new system. And so, yeah, Kyler, a B-list version of Baker, a lot of similarities in how their stats came to pass. Kyler's going to be better on the move than Baker was. Baker was definitely better on the adjusted platform than Kyler was. Baker did a little bit more testing tight windows, a little bit more testing downfield, but there's a lot of similarities in how their data came to pass. Kyler, the big questions you're going to have are going to be his footwork through his progressions in the pocket. That's the one big area where he has very little comfort, whereas Baker was pro-ready.
And I think, too, when you look at Kyler, he's a one-year starter. And, Baker naturally having some more experience, he's going to get farther into his progression, be more comfortable, be comfortable enough within the offense to be able to do that. And he's going to gamble a little bit more, again, just because he has the comfort level to do that. So I think we look at one-year starters as a negative thing, at times. But I also think that has to be part of the context too. As well, they're going to be a little bit better, a little bit more comfortable in year two.
No, I agree, and that's really one of the main reasons why I'm okay with Dwayne Haskins. You know what I mean? Like I didn't like his film eval. I don't like his numbers in the CQ, but he is a one-year starter, and so that you expect big steps forward in his young career.
Yep. Yeah. Definitely. Absolutely. So, now we got a little bit into Haskins. We've talked a little bit about Locke. We've talked a little bit about Greer. One other guy who's getting a lot of first-round buzz is Daniel Jones. So, was there anything that stood out, to you in a big way about Daniel Jones?
Yeah. So I think the first thing that stands out with Daniel Jones is a not very good thing. And the not very good thing is that Daniel Jones' target share, his attempt share, how frequently he threw the ball beyond his first read, comes in right at 8% of his attempts, which is very, very low. Only lower player, I believe, is Brett Rippon out of Boise. So we're talking about a player who had so many pre-snap reads, who just was simply reading an overhang, reading a curl flat, reading a hook curl defender, just basically picking a secondary key and making him wrong off of double slants, off of RPO slant, off of RPO curl, off of bang A post. Right? Like there's just so much pre-snap, one decision and go stuff. Right? Where like if you watch it, you go like, oh, well, Daniel Jones got to his second read. He could have thrown to that guy, but he chose not to. He threw to the other one. That's not how reads work. He read a defender and made him wrong. That's one read, one decision. And so he scores very poorly for me in terms of his expected ability to handle half field and full field and even half field progression because of how infrequently he did it at the college level. And you see similar things, only 12% of his throws into tight windows. Again, these are super small numbers. What's exciting about Daniel Jones is the ability to throw to the short intermediate areas of the field. I mean, we're talking about a player right now who had 45% of his targets 0 to 9 yards down the field. And he had almost 40% of his yardage output from there as well. Super strong in that area, working the quick game. That was the style of his offense. And very effective throwing to the middle of the field. Almost 100% of his balls in between the hashes were catchable, no matter the target depth. So really good working in the middle of the field as well. That being said, we simply have a player who played in a watered-down system, had a lot of the decisions taken out of his hands, wasn't able to do much in terms of creating after the structure of the play was taken away. So, yeah, like I get it. I see some of the translatable stuff. He's big and he's tall. He's got a good arm. It's not amazing, but it's good, whatever. There's so much projection in him that as a year one starter, I'd be very, very worried.
Yeah, definitely see that, and that's one of those things that you see every year. We get a little too hungry to take a quarterback, and it's weird how it breaks down with sometimes it's even like the top guy they're talking about. It's like, no, why aren't you talking about these other couple? And another guy from a school not too far away, Mitch Trubisky comes to mind. I think the NFL was all over him, and I think a lot of us on the outside were watching Mahomes and Watson saying, well, what about these guys? But it's interesting some of the things that go into that and the factors that come into play, and and maybe we've canceled out the maybe Baker Mayfield has made people forget about the height issue, or maybe it only works for guys from Oklahoma or something. But I feel like there's all these little factors that maybe don't really matter that fall into some of those decisions at that level. So overall, we've covered kind of most of the guys at the top of the draft. Who stands out to you as somebody a little bit deeper that that he's showing some numbers that show some real promise, and maybe not maybe could be a Dak, maybe could come in real quick and make a difference, or maybe just somebody that's going to develop behind an Eli Manning or behind a Tom Brady and be a star in a couple of years. Who stands out to you like that?
Yeah, it's got to be Tyree Jackson, the Buffalo kid, and simply Jackson is billed as an inaccurate quarterback, and it's not hard to see why. When he misses badly. We're talking about a player with 20 interceptable attempts on the 300 or the 446 dropbacks I charted, and so that's a very high ratio. We're talking about, in terms of chartable passes, over 5% of his attempts are interceptable. Bad news bears. But one of the things I really like about the CQ is that it counts inaccuracy equally. So if a ball is barely not catchable, or if it's 7 yards off, that's an inaccurate pass, and those are the same, because really this is like a horseshoes and hand grenade situation, right? Like, you don't get points for being close but uncatchable when the other guy was really wildly uncatchable. Again, it's reflected in the interceptable numbers, but Jackson's inaccuracy, there's no gradient, there's no magnitude of it. So we have a player who actually came in with .874 in the accuracy, .601 in the placement. Those aren't great numbers, but they're fine. They don't illustrate a quarterback who's chronically inaccurate. What we also see is a player who, like I said, nobody's good on the adjusted platform. He's good on the adjusted platform. Marginal changes in placement and accuracy and completion percentage. Same thing goes for on the move. Same thing goes for outside of the pocket. He's really, really great creating outside of context. And players who create outside of context can always win for you. They can always cause problems. We also have a guy in Tyree Jackson who's a good athlete. People don't acknowledge how good he is, but a 3.6% scramble rate is pretty good, second only in his class to Kyler Murray. So he's very willing to tuck the ball and run, and very effective when he does so. Adjusted conversion rates in terms of third down, 3rd and 5+, and then also in the red zone, something that I calculate how good you are as a passer is just your pure conversion rate. But then when we also consider drops, scrambles, sacks, throwaways, all those things, really, really strong numbers for Tyree Jackson. Over 50% on third down was his conversion rate, 51%. 49 for 3rd and 5+, and then 43% in the red zone. Huge difference. His red zone as a passer, pretty weak. I mean, the Buffalo just threw fade route after fade route after fade route. But when you start calculating in his ability to run and his ability to draw DPIs on those fade routes, really, really high conversion percentage in the red zone. And so he's an effective situational player in that regard because of his legs. Those two things, the surprisingly good accuracy scores, especially in the adjusted platform and on the move, as well as the adjusted conversion rates, make me quite excited because it shows a player who can create outside of structure.
Yeah, and when you talk about the scrambling and some of the things with athletic ability, I forget who it was, but a long time ago I was at a clinic somewhere, and I heard a guy say, quarterback's job isn't to throw the ball, it's to move the club. And whatever the means of doing that is, not everybody can do it in the same way. There's definitely some value to some guys that can create some things in different ways with their athletic ability. Both in terms of scrambling and throwing and by running the ball as well. So, awesome. So, overall, I definitely really appreciate this work, and it's something that like I said, I think it puts a lot of context on things that probably a lot of us are kind of seeing on film, but don't necessarily know how to put into words and aren't charting in nearly the same detail as you are. So definitely a great tool to kind of solidify some of those things and to again be able to go back and look at things and oh man, why am I not watching this guy a little bit more? Hey, why is everybody why are people not liking this guy and I'm liking him? Things along those lines to kind of shore away some of the things you're already seeing. So, all right. Well, appreciate your time. Obviously, this is a crazy busy couple of weeks as we get to the finish line here of the draft season. Of course, never really finished. We'll be starting summer eval soon enough. But so I appreciate your time. Once again, my guest today. Benjamin Solak from the Draft Network and Bleeding Green. If you are not following him on Twitter, you should be. What's your Twitter handle?
At Benjamin Solak. Solak is Solak.
All right, awesome. And yes, it's great work by Benjamin and the rest of the Draft Network team. So really doing yourself a disservice if you're not checking that stuff out. So, all right, well, we will be coming back live on Thursday night next week for our live NFL draft show that we do every year here. So make sure you are checking back from that. Always have some call-ins, some guests, some old NFL guys, some people are at some of the parties at the stadiums. I know we've had like Cersei in the past. We usually have somebody over at the Bengals Stadium as well. So make sure you check that out. We will have live coverage all night for the first night of the draft. And once again, thank you for joining us, and I will see you then.
Thank you.